I can confirm we are now live streaming.
Live stream is working fine, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. Excuse me, I'm just plugging everything in. I've had difficulty getting in this evening, so I apologise for not being ready. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So before we can consider tonight's business, can I please take this opportunity to remind you to keep your devices on mute unless you're speaking. Please indicate that you wish to speak by adding a comment in the chat function or by raising your hand in WebEx. The meeting facilitator will then advise me that you wish to speak. Thank you. So can I make the usual request to everyone to ensure that any mobile phones are switched off or put to silent? Thank you very much. So before we begin the meeting, can I ask that we observe a minute's silence in respect of Captain Sir Tom Moore? Thank you. I think we all agree that he's been a motivating, inspirational figure for us this last year and a Bedford man. So thank you all for that. Okay, moving on with the meeting. I've received apologies for lateness from Councillor Foley. Are there any other apologies, please?
Madam Speaker,
Yeah.
Philly is trying to get in, so I'm just asking Alison Solster to contact her.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Weir. Okay, nobody else. But on that, I can just add, if you lose connection during the meeting or have difficulties with your equipment, please can you contact the meeting facilitator by either indicating in the chat function, presumably if you're in, or phoning the number that's been provided. And may I please ask that you advise me if you need to leave the meeting early. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to the agenda now. We start with agenda item number 1, questions from members of the public. So I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that we can only accept questions from members of the public that have been received by 6 o'clock this evening. I have been advised that Mr. Rob Wall, Mr. Graham Tranquada, Mr. Mike Catel and Mr. Sam Blacklaws wish to ask questions this evening. So can I start with Mr. Wall, please?
Can I be heard, first of all?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Wall.
Thank you. My question to the Mayor is, a year ago, this council welcomed and applauded the Mayor of Al-Walaja, a West Bank village informally tinged with Bedford. Councillor Moon and our Mayor both spoke of the daunting problems the village faces arising from Israel's occupation of the West Bank. Now the village faces a new and worse threat, with the start of work on a new settlement built almost entirely on the village's land, and about half of it within the line of the settlement barrier being built around it. Would you show your solidarity with the people of Al-Walaja by condemning the building of this new settlement? And what other actions do you think we in Bedford can take to support them?
Mr. Mayor, would you like to answer the question, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Wall, for the question. The actions in terms of building on the land are in clear breach of various UN resolutions, I think including UN Security Council Resolution 2334. And I've today written to, after you advised me of this, written to our own Foreign Secretary to ask him what our government is doing. I cannot, when we talked to the Mayor, I think none of us could believe the circumstances in which they lived and how their land was being taken against some international motions that have been passed against this. And our sympathies and concern are not enough. It must be absolutely horrendous what they're going through. But I would encourage everybody to write to either our own Foreign Secretary to ask them what pressure our government can put on the Israeli government to stop this illegal occupation of the village land, or in fact to the Israeli embassy. So I've written today, I haven't had a reply yet, but I'd encourage others to do so. If you are in touch with them, Mr. Wall, can you give them our concern and express our gratitude to you that you raised this issue with us, and I hope others will do that. I've been in contact with Councillor Moon. I'm sure he will likewise send letters, and I'm sure other members of the council will do so to try and put added pressure on the Israeli government to stop these illegal settlements. And I thank you for bringing it to our attention, and I encourage anybody looking in or anybody else to likewise put pressure on the Israeli government to stop this illegal occupation.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary question, Mr. Wall, or would you like to make a short statement?
Could I do both? I have a question anyway.
Yes, of course, carry on with a question.
One thing the villagers would see as tangible support would be the council making our twinning official. Unlike other twinnings, this would have no financial costs. They just want recognition. Would you favour the council considering this?
Thank you, Mr. Wall. I'll definitely talk to colleagues, as many know that the twinning process and is something that we've been running down, and when it was set up in the sort of 60s and 70s, there was a reason for it. And with the constraints, I understand you say there's no budget pressures. There are many other places that I think would like to twin with them, but I will talk to colleagues and yourself about what we can do to offer some support and twinning. I believe they're twinned with some places in London. I think when they came here, they've been to other places within the UK. But I will talk to you further and talk to colleagues in the council about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. You had a comment.
Yes, I was intending to present a diagram I had, and I think Alison Salster has got that and can put that up for everybody to watch, if that's possible.
Yeah, that's up.
It's on its side, but it might not matter if it returned with the the writing's up the right way. The top is to the right at the moment. But anyway, I don't intend, because I haven't got long, to give you much detail anyway. But just to give you an idea of how many problems there are for Palestinians just to live a normal life. Al-Walaja was a village that stretched from the area that's now Israel to the area that's now occupied. But I'm only showing the 26% of it that was inside the West Bank. And that's, you can see the green line, which is the green line separating Israel and should be Palestine, and the black line around the bit of the village that's left. the red line is the barrier that surrounds the village, so they're closed up in within that barrier, and that's an obvious thing to start with. They're not able to go out to their fields beyond that barrier and so on easily. But I'll explain a bit more. The blue broken line is the Jerusalem boundary, and that means that because the Israelis arbitrarily enlarged Jerusalem by about, I think, 10 times or 20 times the size of its original size, the area on the right within that, as I see the picture now, that's within the red outline, that is now in Jerusalem. So, but the people don't have Jerusalem IDs, so their houses have been knocked down. They've appealed to the Israeli High Court to either give them Jerusalem IDs so they can stay there, or to move the boundary so they can be all right and live there with a West Bank ID, and both have been turned down. The other side of the area within the red boundary is mostly Area C, so those could also be knocked down. Normally the houses you already had are all right, but if you try to build a new house, you have to get permission, and applications for permissions are 99% or something like that turned down. The three green orange patches are the settlements that cover a bit of their land, and the main settlement that we're talking about, the new settlement, is uppermost in that diagram and is separated from Har Gilo by the way out for anybody wanting to enter or leave the village. It has that narrow way to go through a gate there to get out. And then in 2018, this is the last thing I'm going to add, I think the Israelis declared that they were going to create an Israeli national park, which is shown on there in a brown outline and brown hatch, a brown hatch within the Palestinian side of the green line. So that would make it more difficult to get into it. But they're also going to move the control point, the checkpoint, into the village, and when they do that, it will be impossible. Those lands will then be out of bounds to Palestinians, absolutely. So far, they have managed in the Israeli legal system to prevent the movement of that checkpoint, but they are already facing a lot of harassment when they try to use the gateway that allow them out of the red ring into the brown area outside of fields. And then you're left with the new settlement, which is the uppermost one, as it's shown on its side there, and that one is going to have more than 900 houses built on it. There are 2,000 people living now in Wallacea, so they'll be comparable in size, and it's been allowed to be built, or seems to be, because they've started building on it. Although the Greater Jerusalem plan says that this is a green area. Oh, I have the quote down here: green area not suitable for habitation. So there will be no more habitation by Palestinians, but another 900 houses for Israeli settlers. I just want you to understand the sort of amounts of problems that people have, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wall. Thank you for that. Right, we'll move on to Mr. Tranquada now, please. Could you put your question?
Unfortunately, he hasn't made it into the meeting just yet. I've been making contact with him, but he's not yet arrived.
Yeah, I think a few people are struggling to get in, aren't they, including myself earlier. So we'll go to Mr. Catel's and Mr. Blacklaw's. In that case, we'll move on to Mr. Cattell first. He's not present, coming to ask his question tonight, so I'm going to put his question, which is as follows. A brief question regarding the budget consultation. The document sent out covered some pages, but there was no explanation as to what the losses or gains to the various budget headings would actually mean in real terms. What services will be cut? What jobs will be lost? The COVID costs are unlikely to be covered by central government, regardless of soundbite, so service level cuts now will only be the start. Borough residents need proper info as to how bad things are. If the council supplies this, I think many more people would respond to consultations. Councillor Headley, would you like to respond to that? It's sort of a question, some questions in there.
Yes, yes, thank you. and thank you to Mr. Cattell for the question. I want to first of all thank him for giving us the feedback on the consultation. We'll take on board his comments and look to see if there are ways we can make the documents easier to interpret in the future. He asked questions about redundancies. I've got an answer I was going to give to Mr. Tranquado actually on that, which I'll give now, at the risk of having to repeat myself later, unfortunately. So we are trying to make savings wherever we can in areas right across the council, in areas to become more efficient. And we're expecting 65% of our savings to come from areas that don't require redundancies. However, some of the savings do result in reduced posts. We're estimating that there will be 95 redundant posts this year. We don't do this lightly, and we're very conscious of the impact this will have on people. It's obviously important to note the actions the council takes to limit that impact on staff. The council has introduced a voluntary redundancy policy. There's a process for seeking redeployment for people, and some posts are held vacant so they can be removed without impacting anyone. We therefore hope that the number of people who face redundancy will be less than the 95 posts. And it's also probably worth recognising that a lot of the savings that are generated are being reinvested in service areas where there's increasing need. We anticipate the creation of around 30 new posts internally from our programmes that are set out in the budget report. Now, I don't say that to diminish the impact of redundancies, and I can assure you that the council intends to follow good practice in handling redundancies. Further in your question, you talk about the savings proposals, and we do what we can to minimise any impact for residents and service users. Our intention is that we implement these savings. There will be as little impact on people as possible. We do this by maximising the savings in the way the council is run. For instance, by streamlining internal processes and by reducing costs for printing and post, for instance. And we're making sure that when we buy goods and services externally, we maximise the value for money in doing that. However, I need to emphasise that this will be challenging and it will be based on very good management right across the council to achieve this. I hope that answers the concerns that are raised in the question.
Thank you, Councillor Headley. Has Mr. Tranquado managed to get in yet? Do we know? I can't see him on.
He's not made it yet.
Okay, we'll go on then to Mr. Blacklaws. Is Mr. Blacklaws with us?
Hi there.
Hi. Could you state your name and say who your question's to, and then ask your question, please, Mr. Blacklaws?
Yep, my name's Sam Blacklaws. Questions for the Mayor. So this is regarding the budget. In March of 2020, the Minister for Local Government, Robert Jenrick, said, "This government stands with local councils at this difficult time, and the government will do whatever is necessary to support these efforts." With this now being the 10th year budget cuts enforced by a succession of Tory Prime Ministers, and services from Bedford being more critical to residents than ever, my question is this: has the council received the money it's owed from the government?
Oh. Sorry.
Speaker, if I could ask Councillor Headley, who's the finance portfolio holder, to answer that, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Headley.
Yeah, thank you.
On mute.
Yeah, no, thank you for this important question. I'm particularly pleased, that you refer to the wider context and the longer term funding cuts that we've experienced, and that's actually very critical. The government has given us extra funding for COVID pressures in the current year, and with very strong financial controls that we've put in place and budget management, we have managed in the current year to avoid the need for any emergency budget or facing sort of effective bankruptcy that some councils, you may have read in the press, having to deal with. However, it's really important, this shouldn't hide the underlying funding position of the council. We've had our main grant reduced by £24 million since 2015. At the same time, we've seen increasing need particularly for adult social care. The government response has been a series of sticking plaster solutions to this, and have not sorted out the long-term funding for social care. So we are in a climate where since 2015, our central government funding has reduced, and we've had insufficient support for meeting the growing needs of the population. So looking to the year ahead, we are faced with making £10.9 million worth of savings to balance the budget. This is down to the repeated short-term and inadequate funding settlements from the government, probably much more than it is down to COVID. This is a longer-term situation we're having to deal with in terms of the funding. We will continue to derive savings wherever we can, because we have to balance the budget. We'll continue to step up to respond to the challenges of COVID, but we should be clear that the lack of adequate, sustainable funding from the government is causing significant challenges for us and other councils up and down the country.
Do you have a supplementary question or a statement?
I do. Thank you, Councillor Headley. So you've mentioned that there's roughly 20 million reductions this year, but there's 10 million worth of savings to be made. So does that mean that the difference there is what's been supplied by the government?
Thank you. Sorry, I may not have been crystal clear there. The £24 million refers to our main grant that's reduced over a period of time. So that was back in the year 2015. Our main grant was around 30 million. It's now around 6 million. So since 2015, that's reduced by £24 million. Clearly, in that time, there's been other funding pressures, as I mentioned, particularly adult social care, which is the most significant, but there were other funding pressures as well in that period of time, which has left us with a gap in the budget that we're trying to put together next year. That gap for next year is £10.9 million. We do have some one-off funding from the government next year for COVID related issues, but of course we have one-off pressures to deal with that relate to COVID and the economic fallout of that. So there is some one-off funding for next year, but there are one-off needs. But I think the point I really want to emphasize is that the medium-term position, the position even without COVID, is one where it's a very challenging for councils up and down the country, and our challenge is of the order of £10.9 million, and that's sort of an ongoing challenge. That isn't a one-off issue because of COVID. That's an ongoing issue that we've got to deal with in our base budget for year after year for the period ahead.
Thank you. Do you have a short statement?
Thank you. Yeah. With all of this in mind, and with the sustained cuts that have been received by the council, would the mayor and the council join myself and local residents and taxpayers in asking the government to pay its debts? The Prime Minister and Robert Jenrick have assured local authorities that they will be making up the difference and ensuring that residents aren't getting shortchanged. So I would appreciate it if you would consider joining our call to the government. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We're now, I haven't seen Mr. Tranquard manage to join us, has he? Is he with us? No. Well, Councillor Headley did say that he'd answered the question to some degree anyway, so hopefully Mr. Tranquard heard that answer, even though he couldn't get in. I'm sorry about that. But that now concludes agenda item 1, and we'll move on to agenda item 2. Agenda item 2 is petitions to be presented by members of the public. I understand that there's no new petitions to be presented by members of the public. Therefore, we'll now move on to agenda item 3. Agenda item 3 is minutes of the last meeting. Does the council approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of January 2021 as the correct record and authorise me to sign them?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much.
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on then now to agenda item 4, disclosures of local and/or disclosable pecuniary interests. As I know members appreciate, it's important that we observe the provisions in the Code of Conduct relating to the disclosures of interests. So can I ask members to disclose the existence and nature of any local and/or disclosable pecuniary interests in tonight's business, or if not, then when the interest becomes apparent? So I've got Councillor Headley, Councillor Crofts, hand up at the moment. So Councillor Headley.
Yes, thank you. Yes, in item 13.1, the housing strategy, have a local interest as a shareholder in Bedford Citizens Housing Association, a £1 shareholder. In item 13.4, the capital programme, I have a local interest as a trustee of the House of Industry in relation to St Peter Street car park. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Headley. Councillor Crofts?
Thank you, Speaker. Items number 9 and 10. My wife works for the Bedfordshire Fire and Rescue Authority.
Thank you. Councillor Meader?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, the same from the item 9. My wife works for the Bedfordshire Rescue Authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hill?
I have the same question with Councillor Headley on the housing.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Councillor McHugh?
Yes, certainly, trustee of the House of Industry, and Councillor Watton did make a special request that since he's got a dodgy connection that I mention all of the trustees. I'm the chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Councillor Moon and Councillor Jackson and Councillor Atkins.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor McHugh. Councillor Atkins has taken her phone down now, her hand down now, so I assume that's what she was going to say as well. Any others? I can't see any more. Councillor Sawyer.
Thanks, Speaker. Item 15, a board member of BCHA.
Thank you. No other hands? Anybody else waving at me? I can't see anybody. So thank you very much. We'll now move on to agenda item 5. This is Speaker's communications. There's been no civic events to report since the last meeting of full council. With regard to this evening's agenda, I'd like to bring your attention to the fact that there is no business to conduct in relation to items 10, 11, 14, 16 and 17. These being questions of Bedfordshire Fire and Rescue Authority. Is somebody not on mute? Because Councillor Meader, you're not on mute. Can you mute yourself? I can hear a lot of background noise. Thank you. That's it. I could hear myself through your... So that's the report of the Bedfordshire Fire and Rescue Authority, report of the Mayor and Executive Members, report of the General Purposes Committee, membership of committees and items brought forward under Procedure Rule 26. Thank you. We'll now move forward to agenda item 6. This is petitions presented by borough councillors. I understand that there's no new petitions to be presented by councillors, so we'll move on to agenda item 7. Agenda item 7 is debate on petitions previously submitted. Councillor Weir has requested that the debate on his petition be postponed to the next meeting of full council on the 24th of February, and I have agreed to this request. Therefore, we'll move to agenda item 8. Agenda item 8 is questions from members. So do we have any questions from members this evening? I've got Councillor Meader up straight away, so you can go first as you switch your microphone back on. Councillor Meader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that. Yeah, I have a question for the portfolio holder for Education and Children's Services, that being Councillor Valentine. My question is, now schools are closed for most young people, and pupils are supposed to be continuing their education from home. Unfortunately, there are families in my ward and beyond who tell me that they are short of laptops and other digital devices to help them communicate effectively with schools and take part in live lessons. James, are you able to inform this council what this local authority and you as portfolio holder are doing to help these people? Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question, Councillor Meader. The government has made laptops available to all borough schools, but in most cases the numbers supplied are not adequate to meet the need. Far too many pupils still have inadequate IT facilities at home or have to share devices with siblings or parents. The voluntary sector has stepped up to help, and a number of charities and religious organisations have made a big contribution. For example, Sulu Sada, the High Sheriff of Bedfordshire, has been tireless in her work in getting laptops out to schools. I've made the Mayor aware of the continued need, and this week the Council for devices from individuals and businesses. Any spare devices can be taken to Quote Fine at 45 St Peter's Street, Bedford on Tuesdays and Wednesdays between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. And as a one-off, this Saturday, the 6th of February, devices can also be dropped off at the Pilgrim Centre car park. That's next to Pilgrim's Prep School on Brickhill Drive between 9:30 a.m. and 1 p.m. All donations will be refurbished or recycled by Veritas Digital Services to protect both you and the children, and they will also add any necessary packages and applications. For more information, please visit www.bedfordshirelearninglink.com. So Bedfordshire Learning Link is one word. So just to repeat that, so that's www.bedfordshirelearninglink.com. Finally, I'm asking all elected members to pass on this appeal via their own networks so that it reaches as many people as possible. Thank you, and I hope this answers your question, Councillor Meader.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Meader?
No, I thank James for that answer. I certainly learned a few things there, and I hope that was useful for other members on this call. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Meader. Councillor Bywater.
Thank you. Yes, my question it relates to something from last full council. I asked a question about the government's awful plans to extend Yarlswood, which everyone is very familiar with, putting 200 asylum seekers in porta cabins on what is basically an industrial estate. I appreciate many members, including the executive, agree with me that this is inhumane and wrong. And many of you will have seen an open letter from faith leaders this week condemning the plans, expressing serious concerns about physical and mental welfare of these people, as Bedford was among those people. So my question is, Councillor Van, are you able to confirm yet that the council can take enforcement action against the Home Office for them to seek planning permission on the site? And worst case scenario, if this does go ahead, is there yet a plan, a COVID outbreak plan for the site?
Thank you, Councillor Bywater, and thank you for your correspondence on this matter as well. I did see the letter from faith leaders, and I share many of the concerns raised by those who signed that letter as faith leaders. And in fact, in a meeting with one of the signatories of the letter, who helped put it together, I have had an update on what the Home Office has told him, which is because as part of our due diligence, we are working with the local planning authority of finalising COVID outbreak management plans, and then have some further work to do on the physical site. So I think, as far as our planning enforcement investigation goes, it is doing what it needs to do. Now, that investigation is ongoing, and my understanding is that because it's not Crown land, but because the Crown have a legitimate interest in it under the schedule that they're claiming they have access to, the likelihood of us being able to enforce is challenging. And I think if I read the statute correctly, and I have had a briefing on this from officers, as you can imagine, we would also have to ask the Crown for permission to take enforcement against the Crown, which is a slightly surreal, almost Gilbert and Sullivan-esque approach towards the law, unfortunately. It is a hugely serious issue, and it is hugely disappointing, I think, the approach that the Home Office have taken. That case is open as far as I'm concerned, so I will write to you and update you as and when we hear back. And the last correspondence I saw from the Home Office on the matter was essentially a holding response, but they are sort of supplying us with the documents that they're required to as part of sort of their confirmation that they think they have permitted development. So that's where we are. As far as a COVID outbreak control is concerned, I think Councillor Jackson may be in a better position as public health portfolio holder to answer that if there are any developments on that from our perspective as a local authority. But I obviously did share with you that comment that I had heard from the faith leaders as well. And I'm in regular dialogue with them, so hopefully that helps in terms of my perspective. I mean, I think almost everyone in the council last meeting shared our horror at the proposed treatment, and that has only got worse in recent weeks when we have seen just how badly people are being treated at the Kent barracks as well, in frankly inhumane conditions. And the leak that we saw that suggested the reason they were not being kept in better conditions is because it might look bad is I mean, it left me speechless. It is absolutely horrendous. So I'm hugely disappointed by the Home Office's approach, and I think we're all horrified by the lack of quality of provision that has been proposed. But that's the update on the sort of planning law as well as it stands, because if we're not able to, then we're not able to by law. So that hopefully is helpful, and I will update you with in writing when I hear a further update.
Thank you. I have Councillor Jackson's hand raised. I don't know whether it's in response to this or it might be she's having trouble with her connection, I think. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Bywater?
Just a comment, really. Thank you, Councillor Headley. I'm really pleased that the council are taking this seriously and that
Councillor Van.
Investigations are happening. I really do appreciate it. And like you say, many people are of the view that the Home Office plans are really politically motivated. It's a deliberate hostility to those seeking refuge, and it's not at all what's best or necessary for those vulnerable people, not least COVID infection. So I hope we all agree the council should continue to do everything within its powers to try and prevent this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bywater. So I have Councillor Gamble. I don't know whether Councillor Jackson was going to respond to you, Councillor Bywater, but she's having trouble. So when she comes back, we'll ask her again. But in the meantime, Councillor Gamble, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Something considerably more parochial for Councillor Van. I noticed we started ripping up the high street on Monday. Just along the way from that, of course, is All Hallows, which is still a building site. When's All Hallows going to get finished, Councillor Van?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Gamble. I may actually pass that on to Councillor Royden because the works in All Hallows sit within his portfolio. I thought
so if something like that might happen.
Well, my understanding is the works are due to finish around April, and those works are making good progress. So if Councillor Royden wants to add to that, that might be the best thing for him to do.
Surely.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure you didn't mean to sound pejorative, Councillor Gambold. So let me just say that when we had our last bid meeting, the businesses were incredibly supportive of what's happened at All Hallows. The materials which are used, the craftsmanship which has been used, the way in which the contractors have interacted with the businesses has been outstanding. An area of town which was looking a little tired has been transformed. And I think everybody appreciates what's happened and taken place there. So I'm delighted to say that it's going to be opened in only a few months' time. It'll be completed in a standard that I think we can all be proud of in our town. Now, of course, having done that, we don't want to see any reflection which is anything less than outstanding in our high street, because that should be part of the best part of our town. So we've invested millions of pounds in upgrading the high street, Silver Street, and moving on to St. Paul's Square, to make sure that these are again part of our town that we can really be proud of. And that's been welcomed by everybody from bid to councils to residents. We had a long consultation process which we went through before taking on those works. They've started again with a contractor who's doing an outstanding job of communicating with our businesses. And we're going to see a transformation of our high street so that no longer are you going to be walking down the pavements and you've got puddles and you've got uneven paving slabs. It's going to be paved again in beautiful materials, York stone and granite, something which our town is worthy of. And so taking away the racetrack which we used to have down the high street, widening the pavement so that people have a much better shopping experience, enabling people, yes, still to have access to our town centre, because that's really important, because no good shutting it off so people can't come, but transforming it so that it's a better place to be. And other schemes which we've got around the high street, the work which is taking place on Horn Lane currently, the work which has already taken place on Greyfriars, which takes traffic out of the high street so that it's a much better place, lowering the fumes, making sure that we've got better air to breathe. This is why businesses have welcomed it. And I hope that he would get on board and change his language a little bit so that it's not just ripping up, but transforming for the better something which decades of people will be able to be proud of in Bedford. And I'm also delighted to say, of course, that we've been able to attract funding to support that work to take place. So it's also something which has received wider support from outside Bedford. I'm very grateful to all of those bodies which have contributed to foot the bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary question or a short statement, Councillor Gamble?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a further question. I thank Councillor Royden for explaining who's in charge of what at the moment, and I stand corrected. I thought because it was Town Centre, it was Councillor Van, but I thank Councillor Royden for his reply. The point he seems to have missed, and I'm talking about my experience now as a pedestrian. I'm not interested in cars for a moment, and the racetrack of the High Street, which I've never really noticed as a racetrack. You've got two major pedestrian routes through Bedford that are now both building sites. Wouldn't it have been better to finish one before we started the other?
Well, sorry, my mute is a bit slow to come off. Well, I wouldn't claim to have great foresight, but it has turned out really well, because when we're trying to get people not to go into town and to stay safe, we're getting all this work done. Now, I'd like to claim credit for having known that we were going to be experiencing this lockdown in the time that we are, but it's just good fortune. And the fact that we've been able to do it and not inconvenience businesses at a time when it's really, really busy, I think is quite important. We've managed to keep the work to the best time of the year and least inconvenience our shoppers and our businesses. So no, I think it's worked out really, really well. And you'll find that the work in All Hallows will be finishing very shortly, whilst the work in the High Street goes on for a much longer period. So this is just sensible.
Do you have a statement, Councillor Gamble?
Only to thank Councillor Royden for a wonderful spin on that. I take his point.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. I see your name up, but I understand you're on the phone. Do you have your question that you wish to ask?
Jane.
Madam Speaker, I've unmuted Jane. I think she's still having problems with the audio.
That's Louise, is it? Can you hear us, Councillor Jackson?
I can just about hear you on the phone. I'm trying to get some audio visual up, but it's not really working. My hand was actually up because I was hoping to respond to the points that Councillor Bywater
I thought so.
made.
Sorry.
However, I think we're a bit late for that now, so perhaps I can speak to her another time about that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jackson. I'm sorry you're having trouble. I think there's a few people having a bit of trouble tonight.
It happened.
Okay. Right. Councillor Meader, I still have your hand raised. Is that another question or is that from earlier? Can't even see him now.
Sorry, Chair. No, it's an old hand. I'll take it down. Sorry about that.
It's an old hand. Okay. Do I have any more questions? I've got no more hands up.
Speaker Tom Wootton.
Oh, carry on, Councillor Wootton.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I've been waiting. I can't do both, having the speech and the pictures, so I don't have that broadband. But this is a question to the Mayor, and I just wanted a question to the Mayor about council policy. Is it still council policy to try and encourage the East-West Rail route to come through the middle of Bedford town? I just wondered, he said it before, and I just wondered, is that council policy, and would the Mayor sort of clear that up for me?
Yes, it is, Councillor Wootton.
Okay, so thank you very much. That's one of the best answers we've heard. Could the Mayor tell us sort of how did he arrive at this this decision? You know, did he have any numbers of trains, and what sort of consultation did he do? Did he talk to local councillors, or did he talk to any of the parish councils, or was there any discussion at the executive that I missed, or one of the committees? You know, could he point me in the direction of where this big decision was made, and and how he came to the decision?
Yes, Council, and of course the decision about the corridor, and it is a corridor at the moment, is made by the East West Rail Company and not by the Borough Council, and they are about to start another consultation on the actual route itself. And I would encourage all residents and parishes to get involved in that, and they were all invited to the consultation by East West Rail Company. We had some analysis done on the economic benefit to the borough in terms of the connectivity, and the connectivity of having Bedford Station as a hub, connecting what is effectively 4 rail lines, so east-west connection, the Thameslink connections, and the 2 services that East Midlands Trains will run. That's been the Intercity when they do decide to stop in Bedford, and the Corby Electric line, Corby to London, would have the most benefit to the Borough Council. And this has been discussed at the executive, and has work has been done on that, extensive work in terms of making us a rail hub where the connectivity via Bedford Station, you'll know the evidence, I'm sure you will do, that the more times you have to change rail, the less likely you are to use it. But I would encourage everybody to get involved. We did not run the consultation. It is East West Rail Company, and they are about to start, and sometime the first quarter of this year, I believe, and I'm hoping Councillor Headley will nod his head to say it is the first quarter this year. Yes, he is. A consultation on the route, and I would encourage everybody to get involved. Councillor Wootton.
Could I come in further to answer the question as the council representative on the East West Rail Consortium, not the company, the consortium?
Yep.
I think it's important to recognise a few things. Firstly, it has been a long-standing position of this council, with cross-party support, that we want the East West Rail service to serve Bedford Midland Station. That's not something that's been decided recently. That's had cross-party support for a long period of time, and in a number of documents that have been out to extensive consultation. I can give you a short list of some of those documents that have referenced this. So Bedford's Passenger Transport Strategy 2011 to 2021 talks about Oxford, Milton Keynes, Bedford, Cambridge service. The Allocations and Designations Plan for Submission September 2011 talks about East West Rail Policy CP27 with a route that passes through Bedford. The Allocations and Designations Plan July 2013 again says a route that passes through Bedford. Local Plan 2013 for submission September 2018 says about the council's preferred option is for East West Rail to be routed through Bedford Midland Station. A rail strategy for Bedford, which was an executive decision in December 2019, talks about routed through Bedford Midland. The Local Plan 2030 that was adopted in January 2020 again talks about the council's preferred option is for East West Rail to be routed through Bedford Midland Station. The core strategy road issues. Oh, sorry, I've mentioned that, I think, already. So, this is not a sudden last-minute decision. This is a decision that goes back for many, many years in multiple documents, many of which have been out for extensive public consultation, sort of through the local plan process, and we've clearly reflected that long-established and the right position, in my opinion, of the council, that we need this railway to serve Bedford, Midland. We would be, I think it's been accepted across the whole council that we want to have the benefits of East West Rail for Bedford. To bypass Bedford would lose a lot of the economic benefits that would otherwise flow in our direction.
Right.
Do you have a statement, short statement, Councillor Wootton?
A little statement. It is a couple of minutes. I'm so glad that this has been out for so long, and I mean, Councillor Headley have done so much research about this, because I can't get to the bottom of how many actual trains we're talking about that are going to come through the middle of our town. You see, I have some experience of the X5 bus, uses the X5 virtually weekly, and sometimes that bus is completely empty. And to base a train line on the use of the X5 between Oxford and Cambridge seems very strange. But of course the expense of running a bus is so much less than running a railway. And so we get to this real puzzling conundrum of having this huge expense and wondering what it's for. And of course, I dispute the benefits to the town of having the East West Rail come, because you have a dispute between how much it actually benefits Bedford, because you know, I know a lot of people that live in Bedford and work in London. There are very few people that live in London and work in Bedford, and you're going to be a commuter town for Cambridge and for Oxford. And the benefit to the town is, in the figures that I have seen in our little group, the Northern Villages, is quite negligible. And of course, this bases it on, even if you double the amount of traffic that's on the X5 bus, and you try and get the figures, you can't. And it's really puzzling me, because they're so keen on this, and nobody's actually mentioned the elephant in the room, which is freight. And that, what I'm reading in the figures that are coming to us, is the real reason this railway is going to be built. It's going to be built for freight from the East Coast, and the A14 is a hugely expensive road to upgrade. This is cheap compared with upgrading the A14. All the rest of it is wonderful. But freight can't get onto the main line during the day because it's filled up. So what the mayor's decision actually has done is doomed Bedford to be the rail hub in the evening, and at night we're going to have heavy freight trains running all night and through all these northern villages. And it just puzzles me that, again, the mayor has done this without any consultation to any of those villages or any of those councillors affected. You know, it's a real legacy that you're going to put trains through the middle of Bedford all night. So thank you for that opportunity, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I was named. Could I just make a comment?
Not really.
There is only one mayor here, Councillor.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Mayor.
As outlined before, this secret decision has a long list. Is Councillor Wootton saying that he did not see any of those and never read them? That is a worrying statement for a representative of villages. Maybe he could reflect on that.
Right. As I've been named, Mr. Mayor, as I've been named, it is not so much that consultation, it's the type of consultation and the number of trains. Do you know the number of trains, and do you know the number of freight trains? And have you had any contact with the parish councils? It was a simple thing. I'm really run and run like the trains. And Madam Speaker, thank you so much for the opportunity to ask a question.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wootton. I'm going to close that now because it just gets a batting to and fro. I've got Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was going to ask a question along very similar lines to Councillor Wootton, actually. I presume it should be directed more to Councillor Headley, and that is again in relation to freight. Was any consideration in relation to directing the or promoting the East West Rail line going through Bedford to the 24-hour freight, or rather overnight freight, that is going to be running to through Bedford? Was any consultation undertaken with residents of Bedford town itself as to this this problem?
I don't think it's really a surprise to anybody that railways carry freight. I think if you went on a train a journey, you would spot there are freight trains using the railway lines as well. I'm shocked that you've suddenly discovered that freight trains use railway lines as well as passenger trains. The freight trains use the existing railway line that goes through Bedford. You know, if you go down Bedford Station, you will see freight trains coming through. This won't bring freight to Bedford where there's no freight before. We have freight trains. I'm surprised. I'm surprised that you've only just discovered that railway lines carry freight. But I think perhaps the fundamental point you're asking about is that, are we building a freight railway? Now, the business case for this is a passenger railway, a fast passenger railway between Oxford and Cambridge, serving Bedford and all the benefits that will come to Bedford from that fast passenger railway. It will go beyond Oxford and Cambridge as well. There are certainly options looking beyond that, certainly to beyond Cambridge to places like Ipswich and Norwich, but also there's opportunities being looked at beyond Oxford as well to the southwest. This is bring huge benefits to our area being on that network. I'm actually flabbergasted by the conversation we're hearing tonight. This is the first time I've heard any Conservative councillors on this council argue that there's some problem with the East West Rail line coming through Bedford. Up till now, it's been supportive, and I've heard Conservative councillors supportive of this project. It seems that you've only just discovered it now, and your information you've got has been very poor research. There's a lot of information out there, and I think you've not chosen to look at the information that has been there. You've not chosen to get involved in the consultations that have happened before, and you're coming to this very late, very ill-informed, and not actually looking at the interest of Bedford Borough as a whole, which we have done.
Councillor Foster, do you have a supplementary question or a statement?
Yes, I do. I'm amused to see all the slightly childish smirks of various councillors on this committee. I think it's rather a shame that we have to stoop to childish smirks when people make comments. But I think I have to take issue with Councillor Headley, because he is absolutely incorrect. All Conservative councillors did not support the route coming into Bedford town. As far as I'm aware, the majority of Conservative councillors supported the route south of Bedford, where there are much better road links, rail link, potential rail links, etc. We did not all support the rail link coming into Bedford, and I'd like to make that extremely clear.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Foster, that's your statement. Do we have any more questions? Can't see any more hands raised on the panel. Anybody waving at me? Shout out if you are, because I can only see a few. No, can't see any more. So with that, I'll conclude agenda item 8 and move on to agenda item 9. So agenda item 9 is report of the Bedfordshire Fire and Rescue Authority. Can I invite Councillor Gambold as one of the Council's representatives on the Fire and Rescue Authority to present the report of the authority's meeting held on the 12th of January 2021 and to move its receipt. The report starts on page 9, brackets 1 of the agenda. Councillor Gambold, please.
Happy to move the report, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Is the motion seconded?
Councillor Atkins, seconding.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions on the report? Can't see any hands raised, nobody waving at me. Any comments on the report? No, can't see any comments. Councillor Gambold, would you like to sum up, please?
Nothing to add, Speaker.
Okay, thank you. So the motion is before Council, and as the report is for receipt only, I'll assume that we're all in favour unless you indicate otherwise, either by raising your hand or stating your name. No, so the motion is carried. That concludes agenda item 9, and we move on to agenda item 12, as there's no business to conduct relating to agenda items 10 or 11. Agenda item 12 is Local Government Act 2003, Section 25 report. So in relation to item 12, I understand that the Assistant Chief Executive Enabling Services has nothing to add to his report. So I will move from the chair that the report be received. Can I invite a member to second the motion in respect to the report, please?
Seconded.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there any questions? Are there any comments? No. So the motion is before the council. As this report is for information only, again, I'll assume that we're all in favour unless you indicate otherwise by either raising your hand or stating your name. No, can't see anyone, so I assume that the motion is carried. So that concludes agenda item 12, and we'll move on to agenda item 13. Agenda item 13 is reports of the executive. So I'll now ask Councillor Atkins to present the first executive report on the housing strategy 2021 to 2026, starting on page 13.1, brackets 1 of the agenda. Councillor Atkins, please.
Thank you. I'll give a brief introduction to this. This housing strategy is for the next 5 years and it replaces the previous one, and it's now the overarching framework against which we will consider and formulate other policies on more specific housing issues. The strategy has been to the Housing Committee and it was approved by the Executive on the 6th of January, and it is now before full council to note.
Thank you, Councillor Atkins. Is the motion seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got Councillor Caswell would like to comment, but are there any questions, first of all, on the report? Can't see any hands raised. Nobody waving at me. So Councillor Caswell, would you like to comment on the report?
Thank you, Speaker. This is the first time I've addressed the council without having a conflict of interest from having worked in the sector and being on the council. So it seems to be fashionable tonight. I can say what I really think. Having worked with rough sleepers for many years, I have first-hand experience of what national funding, good local leadership and partnerships on the ground can achieve. So I just want to preface my remarks by saying, thanks to the Rough Sleepers Initiative, there is now no need for anyone to sleep rough in Bedford, and there is no need for anyone to be begging in Bedford. If people ring our charity partners, StreetLink, people are seen within a matter of hours and offered assistance. I just want to place on record my gratitude to Lee Fanco and the Rough Sleepers Initiative team. But I do want to say that rough sleepers, according to Shelter's definition, are only about 5% of the homeless problem. Many more people in hostels or sofa surfing, homeless in other ways. So in relation to the strategy, I just want to say that before I became a councillor, I had less confidence that the same resources of political will were going to focus on homelessness generically than on the smaller problem of rough sleeping, and that I had less confidence that there was the political will to do something about affordable housing. And I have to say that sometimes the corporate language around strategies and consultation, makes one fear for the English language rather than hope for the sort of policy inspiration. But I've been proved wrong by this consultation, and I've been proved wrong by this housing strategy. And I just want to say to Tracy Barrett and her team that they involved a very large number of people in the consultation. I did a Zoom with a local organisation in which someone took part who had a service background and had lived in a public toilet for a number of months, who is now in a sustainable territory. So there were a record number of responses, and I think they were listened to with thoughtfulness and courtesy. Where we couldn't do things because of the law or resources, that was explained well. Where we could do things, there was a constructive response from officers, from the Housing Committee and from the Executive. I want to put that on record too. And there's a number of things that will come, I think, under the strategy. As Councillor Atkins says, the policy is yet to be developed. But for example, affordable housing on former BPHA garage sites, including in my ward. Increases in temporary accommodation, which is a win-win for us in business zones. Continuing to be proactive around empty homes and promoting more affordable housing under the local plan, and being proactive around land supply. So those are my thank yous. I think there are some future challenges. COVID is an obvious one. The economic self-harm that some people call Brexit is another one, because there are increases already in mental health, in domestic violence and in mass unemployment. Those are the things that drive homelessness in all its forms. And I would hope that a future government would reform the Land Compensation Act, which would enable local authorities to be bigger players in the market, and that one day the Treasury would allow social housing providers to lend at long-term Treasury rates. Thank you, Speaker. That's all I have to say. I think this strategy builds on what we've done well in the past. I think it innovates and prepares us well for the future. And I congratulate the portfolio holder, the housing committee, everybody involved and the officers. And I wrote to them at the time and said so, and I commend it to the council.
Thank you, Councillor Caswell. Are there any more comments? Any further comments? See any hands? Nobody waving at me? Councillor Atkins, would you like to sum up, please?
Yes, I'd like to start by saying thank you to Councillor Caswell. That was really good support being shown for the housing strategy, and it also highlighted how seriously we make homelessness and rough sleeping a priority for the council. And indeed, I echo his thanks to Lee Fanco and his team, and also to Tracy Barrett and the team that have been working extremely hard putting the housing strategy together. Councillor Caswell is quite right about how we are dealing with the rough sleeping and homelessness, and sadly it is something which is an extremely difficult for people, especially at this time, but the council can assure everybody that there is accommodation available for everyone who is rough sleeping, and that those that can't get accommodation at the Mercure Hotel for particular reasons, that in the very cold weather we have the SWEPS, which is the severe weather emergency provision, and that every single person is offered accommodation at that time, so there should be nobody having to sleep rough in very cold weather. So yeah, thank you, Councillor Caswell. I think you summed up the details of the housing strategy extremely well.
Thank you, Councillor Atkins. So the motion is before the council. Again, as the report is for information only, I'll assume that we're all in favour unless you indicate otherwise by either raising your hand or stating your name. No? So the motion is carried. Can I just advise people, if you haven't seen in the comments, that Councillor Foster has now left the meeting and Councillor Jackson is on the phone. She's not been able to get back in. Okay, so now move on. Before I invite the finance portfolio holder to introduce the rest of the executive reports, can I remind Council of the conflict resolution procedure as explained to members in the letter from the Chief Officer for Legal and Democratic Services dated the 26th of January 2021, and confirm that this procedure applies to all the remaining executive reports with the exception of item 13.2. I'd also like to remind members that in accordance with government regulations, a recorded vote will take place in respect of the executive reports on items 13.3 to 13.6. So I'd now like to invite Councillor Headley to present item 13.2, the mid-year Treasury Management Report.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'll take this as a sort of standalone report before the main budget reports. This is the annual review of Treasury Management we do at this time every year. This has been considered by the Treasury Management Advisory Panel and by the Executive. There's obviously been an impact of COVID-19 during this time period, with an impact on the financial markets as well as council finances, where we increased our liquidity to manage events at the start of the pandemic, and that's had an impact. In particular, I would highlight Prudential Indicator D, which is exposure to credit risk, where we are above the target. This is a direct result of the decision to increase liquidity in the light of responding to the pandemic at the start of the year. I move the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the motion seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the report? No. Are there any comments on the report? No. Councillor Headley, would you like to sum up, please?
Nothing to add, thank you.
Thank you very much. The motion is before the council. A poll has been set up to enable you to vote either for or against the motion or to abstain, and you'll have 1 minute to cast your vote.
Madam Speaker?
Yes, hello, sorry, who's that?
It's Councillor Sultan. I'm struggling at the moment. Can I give Can I have 30 seconds? I need to log off and log back in again.
Okay, okay, Councillor Sultan. Do we have all the votes in?
Madam Speaker, we do. We have 36 in favour, and also Councillor Jackson has messaged me to say she votes in for, and I will just unmute her for you so you can confirm that.
Councillor Jackson, how are you voting? You're voting for?
Yes.
Thank
For.
you.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So the motion is carried. Thank you. I now invite Councillor Headley to present item 13.3, the Executive Report on the Capital Strategy 2021 to 2024. Councillor Headley.
Thank you. So this report includes the strategy and associated policies and other strategies that are related to it. This capital strategy has been reviewed and updated as shown in the report. It includes an increase in the borrowing limits and updated prudential indicators. Particularly want to highlight that we've for the first time introduced a responsible investment policy to reflect our commitment to the climate emergency and wider responsible investment. With the recommendations as set out in the report.
Thank you. Is the motion seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there any questions on the report? Are there any comments on the report? Councillor Headley, would you like to sum up, please?
Nothing to add, thank you.
Thank you. So as previously mentioned, we'll now move to a recorded vote, as the law requires a record of the names of those persons who cast a vote for or against the decision or who abstained from voting. That needs to be included in the minutes. So I now invite the Chief Executive to take the recorded vote on the Capital Strategy 2021 to 2024. Mr. Simpkins, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Councillors Abbott, Councillor Abbott.
Sorry, 4, thank you.
Thank you. Akhtar.
4.
Atkins.
4.
Burley.
4.
Bywater.
4.
Caswell.
4.
Jones.
4.
Crofts.
4.
Councillor Foley, have you joined us?
Yes, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
She's left. I didn't.
Thank you. Gallagher.
4.
Gambold.
4.
Headley.
4.
Hendricks.
4.
Hill. 4. Mr. Mayor.
You go on mute, please.
Yeah. Could I ask all members, if unless they're answering, can they please be on mute? I'm having a real job to hear the answers. Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
4.
Councillor Jackson.
4.
Martin Moran Bryant.
4.
Masood. Councillor Masood.
4.
Thank you. Councillor McHugh.
4.
McMurdo. 4. Meader.
4.
Moon.
4.
Nawaz.
4.
Oliver.
4.
Ryder.
4.
Rigby.
4.
Charles Royden.
4. 4.
Max Royden. 4. Sampson.
4.
Sawyer.
4.
Solomon.
4.
Sultan.
I don't think he's back yet in the meeting.
Okay.
He's put a comment in.
It is 4.
Oh yeah, he's got a 4 in the comments. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Towler.
4.
Valentine.
4.
Van.
4.
Walker. Madam Speaker.
4.
Weir.
4.
Wheeler.
4.
Wootton.
4.
And Zamir. Councillor Zamir. Okay. Those voting, everybody voted in favour. That is carried.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Mr. Simpkins. The motion is carried. So we'll now move on to the next item as items and as items 13.4, 13.5 and 13.6 are interrelated. Can everybody put on mute who's not on mute, please? I can hear a lot of background noise again. Can't see who that is, but thank you, that's better. Sorry. I have agreed, as in previous years, to allow Councillor Headley to make an introductory speech, which will encompass all 3 of these items. That's 13.4, 13.5 and 13.6. After that speech, I'll allow questions and comments in response to that general introduction before going on to deal with each of these items in turn, when I will allow questions and comments on the detail of those items. Any members who wish to move an objection to items 13.4, 13.5 and 13.6 should do so when we reach the item concerned, setting out the reasons for the objection. Councillor Headley, please.
Thank you very much. I want to start by thanking everyone across the council, officers and members, for the constructive work that has gone into this year's budget process in these extraordinary times. I want to thank councillors of all parties that have been supportive of the process, for the Chief Executive, directors and officers from all directorates that have worked to deliver vital services to our residents in this last year, whilst continuing to have a proper financial control. For the Mayor and my colleagues on the Executive for all their work and support, and for the BTOD and finance teams that I've worked particularly closely with on the savings proposals and budget build. As we know, the Council has responded to many challenges this year around the pandemic and then more recently with the floods as well. But throughout this, serving residents with the immediate needs and pressures that they're facing, we have not lost sight of the need to look forwards to ensure that we are best placed to serve the residents of Bedford Borough into next year and beyond as well. Over the next few minutes, I want to draw out a few themes from the budget reports. That is, first of all, looking at the impact of COVID, then our funding shortfall, and finally, our priorities. So starting with the impact of COVID on our budget. As we meet tonight to set this budget, we're faced with unprecedented levels of uncertainty as to what will unfold in the weeks and months ahead. We need to set a budget that will be strong enough to meet whatever challenges come our way. We've put this budget together not only in a time of uncertainty caused by the pandemic, but also the economic impact that is predicted to follow. We know from experience in the current year that there will be an impact on our income, the income that helps to pay for particular services. We also know that many more people will rely on the council for support. That includes those that are homeless and rough sleeping, as well as those who need council tax support because their income has fallen or they've become unemployed. We have provided for those needs in our budget. On top of that, we have to deal with a one-year funding settlement from the government. This gives us no comfort at all as we try to look beyond the next 12 months in providing services for local residents. In balancing the budget, we've had to look at 2 principal sources. Firstly, we have the one-off grants from the government. These are obviously welcome, but need to be seen in the context of the fact that they are one-off. The 6.8 million one-off grants are offset in the current year by 2.4 million reduction in the new homes bonus, as well as just 155,000, that's 155,000 increase in social care grant to meet a £5 million increased pressure in adult social care. So that's £155,000 extra grant to meet what we're projecting to be a £5 million increased pressure. Put that together with the £24 million reduction in our main grant that since 2015 that I mentioned earlier, and you can see that in the context, this creates the need for substantial savings. So secondly, we need to make £10.9 million savings to balance the budget. These savings come from our existing programmes extended to meet the new challenge. We continue to target savings from pushing for more efficiencies in the way the councils run, including more use of technology to streamline operations. We'll work to deliver more value from our procurement, as well as reducing costs in our directorates in ways that have the least possible impact on frontline services for residents. And then finally, I want to spend the next few minutes highlighting those areas where we are investing to meet residents' needs, both in year and beyond. It's always been a priority for us to respond to the needs of those most vulnerable in the borough. I've already mentioned the council tax support, where our schemes continue to give more support to our residents than many other councils. This is particularly important this year as more people have lost their jobs through the fallout from the pandemic. We continue to invest more in our adult and children's social care services, with 2/3 of our revenue budget investments going into those areas. I also want to mention the local area coordinators, also known as community wellbeing champions within adult services, that have been very well received and effective. I want to recognise that the Conservative Group highlighted this scheme last year and have spoken to me again recently about expanding this. I'm pleased to say that it is a key part of our community support model that we are taking forward in this budget. There will be a review of the scheme to take place alongside the village agents, which is a similar scheme, with the intention of expanding the combined reach in a new programme going forward. This is a scheme that I know has support across all parties, and we look forward to the greater coverage that we'll be able to achieve going forward. And we do not forget that we are also facing the challenge of climate change, and we declared a climate emergency that will have a big impact as we continue to make changes to reflect this. Over recent years, we've already been making good progress on this important work. We have an investment of £464,000 in our capital programme for reducing carbon emissions as the latest stage of our £3 million programme. Most visibly, we've seen the replacement of streetlights with low energy LED lamps in recent years. We're moving towards purchasing renewable electricity, and there's a halt on purchasing new vehicles under 3.5 tonnes until we can secure second generation electric vehicles. We also have a major investment in a solar energy farm that makes use of the old landfill site. As I mentioned previously, we've introduced a responsible investment policy for the first time in our treasury management operations. But this isn't to be complacent. There is much more to do and more to come as we work this through as a council. But the budget gives us a good, sound financial basis to do that from. We're also looking ahead through our capital programme and investing for our future. In particular, we're investing in the infrastructure in our borough that will improve the quality of life for residents, support businesses, and give the best educational opportunities for pupils. You can see this through the programmes that reinvigorate our town centre, investments in the capacity of our local road network, new school classrooms in areas of growth, and investment in our rail links, including the Wixham station. So in conclusion, I recommend this budget to you. It's a budget that is robust to face the challenges of the pandemic. It's a budget that protects frontline services and prioritises meeting the needs of the most vulnerable. And finally, it's a budget that looks beyond the immediate challenges to build better infrastructure for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Headley. Mr. Mayor, you had a few additional comments that you wanted to make at this point, I believe.
Thank you very much. Sorry, thank you, Speaker. Just to second the three items that are coming up, you may wish to call me again, but I'd just like Councillor Headley, I'd like to make some brief comments at this point about the budget as a package. First, I'd like to thank everyone for their input into the budget process, and in particular, I want to thank Councillor Headley for all his work, that of the other portfolio holders, and of course, the officers involved. This is our 12th budget, and it does not get any easier. And in this particularly difficult this year, not just because of the compound effects of year-on-year cuts, but the uncertainty around COVID. We have a remarkable record of saving services, which has been subject to widespread cuts across the rest of the country, or much of the rest of the country. This budget maintains that record with no closures of key facilities or services, and continued support for the vulnerable. We continue to face pressures, and there is a desperate need for the government to conduct a proper comprehensive spending review, and in particular with regard to the ongoing pressures on adult social care, SEND, and our road networks. It was understandable but regrettable that the 3-year comprehensive spending review did not happen, and we look forward to a longer-term review later this year. The crisis in adult social care is something that needs to be addressed nationally and on a cross-party basis. If it is not, local councils will spend an ever-increasing proportion of their budgets on adult social care as residents live longer and often with more complex needs. While we face continued government funding cuts, unknown pressures around COVID pandemic, these budget proposals protect our communities against the impact of those cuts. I commend these reports and the full package before Council this evening. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there any questions of Councillor Headley on his introduction? I can't see any hands raised. Put in the comment. Okay. So are we? Oh, sorry, Councillor Bywater, you're waving at me. Yes, you have a question. Is that right?
I do. Thank you. Yeah, my hand didn't work earlier.
Sorry.
I've got sort of two questions. I don't know if it's appropriate to ask them now or later. I know this. Thank you to Councillor. I know that this for the last 12 years must have been a horrible job, and this year is probably the worst ever. On top of the 10 years of government inadequate funding and cuts, now we have this kind of nightmare, really. But my question is, it's probably not a question that's going to be appreciated, but I'm going to ask it anyway, is with these job losses, for example, I know it's, we've got 95 redundancies, and we're told there'll be voluntary redundancies and redeployment. But on top of a decade of austerity, this is really like to have an impact on frontline services at the worst possible time. And it's not going to get any easier for people, because I think the next year will possibly be worse as furloughs come to an end and job retention and more people are put in hardship. So, and given how hard everyone's worked and council staff have worked, could jobs and services be protected from cuts, frontline services be protected from cuts, if the most senior salaries were reduced?
Councillor Headley.
Thank you, and thank you for recognising the challenges that we've been facing, not just this year, but obviously over a period of time with reduced government funding. First, I think it's important to recognise, as I said earlier in answer to the questions, 65% of our savings are coming from non-staff areas. We are looking for efficiencies, looking for the way we buy things, our procurement strategies. We're looking at ways of making sure we make best use of the budgets that we've got. So the majority of our savings do come from non-staff areas, and I wanted to make that point again. I think that's important. In terms of senior management, clearly we believe that it's important that the burden of these cuts, the challenges, do fall across all parts of the council, and you will have seen there is our proposals for senior management restructure going forward as well. It's been considered by General Purchase Committee. So these impacts will be felt across all, across levels of the council, across senior management as well. And I think that's important that it is that does happen. We have a very strong record of actually making sure our management structure is as streamlined as possible. Since we took over in the administration, we've removed over £3 million worth of costs from the senior management structure. So this is not something that we've not looked at and continue to look at as we've gone forward. So we have already, before this next restructure, already taken over £3 million of funding from our management structure. I think it's also worth noting about the way that our structure is streamlined, in that in the accounts, in the council accounts, it lists the number of employees that earn over £50,000 £50,000. And if you look at the Borough Council, our council, between 2009 and 2019, which is the latest available, the number of people earning over £50,000 has gone down from 156 to 140. Now that's a reduction, but in fact you have to bear in mind that in that 10-year period there have been considerable inflation, and people will have moved up the grades, and if you'd done nothing, that figure would have gone up by a reasonable amount as people would have moved up through the salary structures. So we've actually reduced the number of people on higher salaries in the council, and I will contrast that actually. I've looked at Central Beds Council. Not necessarily exactly the same size, but in terms of management structure, you'd appreciate fairly, you could have similar levels of management structures, and their number of people on over £50,000 is 282. I remind you, ours is 140. I also had a look at Brighton out of interest, as it's a Green-led council, and they have 318 people on over £50,000. That's 227% more than Bedford Borough Council. So I'm not really going to take any lessons from the Green Party on ways of having cost-effective management structures for councils, because the one council that they do lead has seems to be a very expensive management structure in place. Thank you.
To be fair, could I just come back? To be fair, the Greens haven't been leading very long at all in Brighton. Could I ask another question, please?
Is it a separate question?
It's a separate question, yes.
Okay, I don't have anybody else at the moment wanting a question at the moment, so yes, carry on.
Just thinking about sort of council assets, and particularly the biggest one, Borough Hall. Is there an appraisal of the value of assets, especially Borough Hall, that could be sold either in whole or in part to raise vital capital? Borough Hall serves a population of less than a third of the population for which it was originally intended as County Hall, and it has really high running and maintenance costs. I think I heard not so long ago that bits were falling off it, bits of concrete were falling off it. I mean, it's an impressive bit of brutalist architecture, and I think it has a lot of potential in very many other ways. But if we can not close off that opportunity, I mean, there is potential there to think about that. I don't know. I know many years ago it was spoken of, and I don't know, to be honest, how far that got, but I think there was quite a lot of support for it. And if it comes down to helping to prevent cuts for jobs and frontline services in the long term, and just to be more efficient, which we're talking about a lot, it seems something that we really need to consider seriously, especially now the use of Borough Hall is a fraction of what it was. We don't know when it will go back to normal capacity, if it ever does. It's unlikely that it ever will, home working being sort of reasonably successful for most of staff. So what's the thinking on that? Is that something that's been considered or will be considered?
I think the Mayor would like to respond to that question, at least initially.
I think it's in my portfolio. Obviously, Councillor Bywater, we have actually let out the ground floor, part of the ground floor to police, so we're extending that. And originally, of course, it wasn't just County Hall that covered the borough. We've actually removed an entire building in terms of Town Hall. So we've reduced the number of buildings. So it's not quite a like for like. But we will continue to look at that. And we have been looking at trying to rent out and reduce the space to get an income. Capital receipts isn't about, it's about revenue costs. That's the driving thing from the budget. And we need to find that. So we are looking, and we have been looking for some time to get additional revenue funds to renting it out. But you can imagine that with the pandemic, the takers for office space across the country are reduced. But we will continue to review that and review the cost of Borough Hall and the opportunities it gives us.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this general introduction? Just to let everybody know, Councillor Foley has actually dropped out of the meetings, trying to get back in. So I think a lot of people are having problems this evening. So now we'll move on to comments. No more questions on the introduction. Comments on Councillor Headley's introduction. I've got Councillor Coombs would like to make a comment at this point.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Headley for outlining his budget to us this evening. I have two comments. First of all, on 13.4 on the capital programme, on a personal level, as the member for Wixham's, I'd like to welcome the ongoing commitment to funding for Wixham Station that Councillor Headley mentioned. That is obviously a very important issue locally and something that I am keen to see happen. On the more general, on the revenue budget on 13.5, I think we would all recognise that this past year has been one of immense challenge, both from the scarce financial resources available in local government generally and the support coming from the centre, and with the added overlay of COVID on top. Whilst much of the loss from COVID has been reimbursed by central government, nonetheless there have undoubtedly been stresses and strains where anticipated revenues have fallen short or where service change has been necessary as we've had to adapt to COVID. It has been a very difficult picture. The coming year looks equally daunting. Councillor Headley referred to the adult social care pressures, and I think that is very clear to all of us. Also, the loss of 95 positions is not always a good way to be starting a new financial year. I think it's important to mention that it is positions that are made redundant, not people, and it should not be any slight on them. But clearly, there are people at the end of on the receiving end of this, and it's a very unpleasant experience being made redundant. I know it has happened to me in the past. It's not fun for anybody. So I very much hope that this council will support those people who may lose their jobs. On the specifics of this year's budget, I'd like to start by saying that I do not envy Councillor Headley and the finance team the real challenge of having to put this budget together under the circumstances that I have just outlined. But having met a number of senior officers and Councillor Headley to discuss this year's proposals, my group recognises that the budget has been designed in a way to have no direct effect on frontline services. We've been very specific in our questions, and we understand that a lot of the savings that have been made are as a result of restructuring, and a significant amount obviously comes from the DOM proposals as well. So addressing the point that Councillor Bywater just made, I think from our conversations we are satisfied that there is no unlikely to be any direct impact on frontline services. Obviously we're always looking for ways to save money and reduce unnecessary overheads, but we note that creativity is really being pushed to its limit at the moment. I'd like to acknowledge and thank Councillor Headley for including the expansion of the Community Wellbeing Champions as part of this budget. As he said, we did request it at last year's budget meeting, so we are delighted that it has been included this year. After speaking to Councillor Headley, I'd also like to recognise the increased spending on our priority areas, with spending on support for domestic violence services, I understand increasing from 100,000 to 145,000, and also the extension of support for mental health services. Whilst mental health awareness was already an issue pre-COVID, the pandemic and the various lockdowns have exacerbated the strain on some, particularly those who are living in a difficult home environment and for whom the threat of domestic violence is sadly an increasing reality. So I think it is absolutely right that this budget does address those 2 points. On that basis, Madam Speaker, our priorities have been included in this year's budget, and therefore there will be no amendment from the Conservative group this year, and my group will support the budget as put forward by Councillor Headley this evening. In concluding, can I again thank senior officers for their time in meeting my group, explaining the various parts of the budget to us, answering our numerous questions, and for their hard work and diligence in putting this year's budget together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Coombs. Councillor Oliver, I have your hand raised. I know you wanted to speak on 13.5, but would you like to comment on the general introduction as well?
Well, it seems, Madam Speaker, that the previous two speakers have done exactly what I'm about to do. So do you want a break before I make my comments, or shall I make them now?
It's entirely up to you, Councillor Oliver. If they're about the general introduction, then Please make them now.
I may as well. Sadly, I've had to say what I'm going to say now on more than one occasion since 2010, but it's never been truer than this year. No councillor, whatever their political persuasion, stands for election because they want to spend their time cutting services, and no council officer joins a local authority with that aim in mind either. Yet, we find ourselves after 10 years of austerity, where councils have seen their funding from central government savagely reduced in the midst of the pandemic, still waiting for the Prime Minister to keep his government's promise of refunding whatever it takes to local authorities to support their residents throughout COVID. To add insult to injury, the government is very kindly allowing us to put up our council tax by up to 3% to help pay for adult social care, thereby hoping to shift the blame away from their inability to find a proper funding solution for this growing problem. Every council, I suspect, across the country is facing the same budgetary problems as us, whatever their political leadership. I saw a local news programme last week which featured Conservative-controlled Peterborough facing a massive funding gap, and Labour-run Luton contemplating hundreds of staff redundancies, both hoping to avoid the fate of Northampton County Council, which went bankrupt. Thanks to sound financial management, Bedford Borough Council is doing relatively well by comparison. I have watched our officers and executive members grapple with the seemingly impossible task of not cutting our essential services while retaining the staff to deliver them for many months now, and yet having to deliver a balanced budget, which we are legally obliged to do. I believe the majority of residents want to see their elected representatives working together to make the best decisions they can under very difficult circumstances. I think that has been achieved with this budget, and the Labour Group will be voting in support of it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Councillor Oliver. Now I've got some hands up. Councillor Meader.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. Just a brief comment, if I may, and I can only echo what has been said by Councillor Sue Oliver. Some might say no surprises there, but as always, Sue speaks with honesty and common sense. Madam Speaker, as it's been said, this budget is tough and certainly not helped by 10 years of austerity where local authorities have seen their fundings cut by this Conservative government. Local authorities up and down the country with funding gaps, which undoubtedly will affect services that residents across this borough elected us as members not only to deliver, but also to protect. And as councillors, we are failing our residents through no fault of our own. Although come election time, if I were to wear a blue rosette, I might find the cuts embarrassing and difficult to justify. It appears to me and many others, this government simply doesn't care about local authorities and the people they serve. One might say there's another agenda, but that's another discussion. Madam Speaker, let me say this. The Labour Group will support this budget, albeit with heavy hearts. It's our duty to deliver a budget, which we will do. However, enough is enough, and I would ask our Conservative councillors, if you haven't already, to use your contacts and influence within your party and make representations on behalf of the people who elected you as their councillors, because those very same people who are affected by these continuous cuts. I can assure you, if it was my party implementing these cuts, I would be doing a lot more than asking polite questions. That said, if it was my party, it wouldn't be my party, if you get my meaning. And just let me finish on almost a positive by saying thanks to Michael Headley and the team of officers he works with for putting this budget together. Like Councillor Sir Oliver stated, none of us became councillors or officers to impose these kind of cuts. And Mike and his team once again have put a budget together under unbelievably difficult circumstances. Well done to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crofts.
Thank you, Speaker. Can I just recognise the hard work of Councillor Headley and all the officers, including the portfolio holders, for putting this budget together. But I'd just like to recognise to members our council tax reduction scheme. We've had a pandemic for the last 12 months. this council has always supported people on low incomes. And you only have to look at local authority areas around us, like in Northamptonshire, Luton, where people have to pay council tax when they're only getting £74 a week because they've lost their job. There's been thousands of people in the last 12 months that have lost their job. There's been more thousands of people that have had reduced incomes and worry every single day about how they're going to pay for food, how they're going to pay for their electric and gas bill. And those residents in our local authority area, Bedford Borough, do not have to worry about contributing towards the council tax, because we want to support those residents and we support them 100% when they're on a low income. Now, we can be absolutely proud that we are one of less than 30 councils in the whole of England that has still 100% council tax reduction scheme. And I can't stress how important this is, because paying £7 a week for your council tax might not sound a lot of money to members in this meeting, but when you're actually trying to live on £74 a week and you've got food to buy, you've got gas to pay, you've got electric to pay, you've got a water bill to pay, you've got your internet to keep going so you can look for work, you've got your housing costs that you've got to contribute to because you no longer get your housing benefit that you used to get due to welfare reform. That council tax reduction scheme is so important for our residents. And you only have to go into the border into Northampton and you're asked to pay 25% of your council tax when you're out of work. And they're going to 2 unitary authorities in Northamptonshire on the 1st of April, and they're still going to be asked to pay 26% of their council tax when they're only getting £74 a week. And what I would just lastly say is that in April, obviously universal credit has potentially going to be reduced by £20 a week, from £94 down to £74. And I would ask all members to write to the government and just ask them to retain that £20 a week in the universal credit payments, because there are Conservatives that support retaining that £20 a week. So we've got to write to the government ourselves as members and ask them to retain that £20 a week, so people don't feel and face that cliff edge when we get to the 6th of April when the benefit rates change. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more comments? Councillor Meader, is your hand an old hand? And Councillor Croft, can you take yours down, please, if yours is an old hand? Is yours an old hand, Councillor Meader, or another comment?
No, sorry, Madam Speaker, I'm struggling tonight with my hand. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Thank you.
It's coming down.
Okay, lovely. I've got no more hands raised in that case. So, Councillor Headley, would you like to sum up following this general debate?
Yes, thank you. Just a brief comment, really, just to say thank you for the positive and supportive comments from people, across party. This is a challenging year, as people have recognised, and I think the residents will appreciate us all pulling together at this time on their behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Headley. So now we're going to move on to the individual items. So I'll now invite Councillor Headley to move item 13.4 on the capital programme. Councillor Headley, please.
Thank you. So we carried out a substantial review of the capital programme in the autumn, and this is an update since that point. I've covered the main themes of this report in my introductory speech, so I'll just move the recommendations that are set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the motion seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there any questions on 13.4? Can't see any hands. Any comments on the report? Councillor Headley, would you like to sum up, please?
Nothing further to add, thank you.
Okay, so as I previously mentioned, we'll now move to a recorded vote on the capital programme. So, Mr. Simpkins, please.
Thank you, Speaker. Councillor Abbott.
4.
Akhtar.
4.
Atkins.
4.
Early.
4.
Bywater.
4.
Aswell.
4.
Coombs.
4.
Crofts.
4.
Foley.
4.
Foster, I believe. The meeting.
Yes, she's gone now.
Yeah. Just want to make sure she's not come back. Councillor Gallagher.
4.
Gambold. Councillor Gambold. Councillor Gambold.
Can't see him on the list. He may have. Oh no, he's still on the list. He should be here.
I'm here. Sorry. Yes.
There you are.
Councillor Gambold, how are you voting?
Well, I am obviously. Sorry, I just stepped away from my screen. I think I'm voting for. If that would be appropriate.
Yes, it would.
Splendid. Thank you, leader.
Councillor Headley.
4.
Hendricks.
4.
Hill.
4.
Mr. Mayor.
4.
Jackson.
4.
Martin Moran Bryant.
4.
Masood.
4.
McHugh.
4.
McMurdo.
4.
Meader.
4.
Moon.
4.
Nawaz.
4.
Oliver.
4.
Ryder.
4.
Rigby.
4.
Charles Royden.
4.
Max Royden.
4.
Sampson.
4.
Sawyer.
4.
Solomon.
4.
Sultan.
4.
Fowler.
4.
Valentine.
4.
Van.
4.
Madam Speaker.
4.
Weir.
4.
Wheeler.
4.
Wotton. 'Councillor Wotton. And Councillor Zamir.
4.
Thank you. That is carried unanimously of all those voting, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. I just confirm the motion is carried. I now invite Councillor Headley to move item 13.5 on the summary general fund revenue budget.
Yes, thank you. This is the revenue budget that draws together the issues I raised in my introductory speech. It obviously includes reference to the council tax increases and the savings that we've mentioned. I don't intend to repeat the comments obviously I made earlier, so I move the recommendations that are set out in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Headley. Is the motion seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there any questions on the report? Can't see any hands. We're on to comments. Do you have another comment, Councillor Oliver? You wanted to make a comment here, but have you made your comment now that you wanted to make?
No, no further comment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Councillor Oliver. Any other comments?
Yes, Madam Speaker.
Oh, Councillor Foley, was that you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, please. Comments.
Yes, I wanted to note Councillor Meady's earlier admission that what is happening is that there will be service cuts, despite the pretense that various other members of this council are making. And I find it very regrettable that there has been such a degree of dissembling by members of this council in that respect.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments? I can't see any. Councillor Headley, would you like to sum up, please?
Nothing further to add, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Headley. So again, we'll now move to a recorded vote on the summary general fund revenue budget. Mr. Simpkins, you again, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Councillors Abbott.
4.
Akhtar.
4.
Atkins.
4.
Burley.
4.
Bywater.
Abstain.
Caswell.
4.
Coombs.
4.
Crofts.
4.
Foley.
Abstain.
Foster. Absent. Gallagher.
4.
Gambold.
4.
Headley.
4.
Hendricks.
4.
Hill.
Definitely 4.
Mr. Mayor.
4.
Jackson.
4.
Martin Moran Bryant.
4.
Masood.
4.
McHugh.
4.
McMurdo.
4.
Meader.
4.
Moon.
4.
Nawaz.
4.
Oliver.
4.
Ryder.
4.
Rigby.
4.
Charles Roy.
4.
Max Roy.
4.
Sampson.
4.
Sawyer.
4.
Solomon.
4.
Sultan. Councillor Sultan.
In favour 4.
Thank you. Towler.
4.
Valentine.
4.
Van.
4.
Madam Speaker.
4.
Weir.
4.
Wheeler.
4.
Wootton. Councillor Wootton. And Councillor Zamir.
4.
Madam Speaker, that is carried.
Thank you very much. Just to confirm, the motion is carried. So I'll now invite Councillor Headley to move item 13.6 of the Executive's report on special area charges for 2021-22. Councillor Headley.
Thank you. This updates the special area charges following the review that's undertaken this year and is updated to reflect the current budget and the tax base, the budget that we've just agreed. And I would obviously like again to thank everybody who voted for the budget, who are pulling together in the interests of local residents, despite the challenges that we're facing this year. And I say particularly thank those that voted for the budget. I move the recommendations as set out in this report.
Thank you, Councillor Headley. Is the motion seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there any questions on this report? No. Are there any comments on this report? Councillor Headley, would you like to sum up, please?
Nothing to add, thank you.
Once again, we're going to move to a recorded vote on special area charges. Mr. Simpkins, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Councillors Abbott.
4.
Akhtar.
4.
Atkins.
4.
Burley.
4.
Bywater.
4.
Caswell.
4.
Coombs.
4.
Crofts.
4.
Foley.
4.
Councillor Foster's not returned. No, thank you. Gallagher.
4.
Gambold.
4.
Headley.
4.
Hendricks.
4.
Hill. 4. Mr. Mayor.
4.
Jackson.
4.
Martin Moran Bryant.
4.
Masood.
4.
McHugh.
4.
McMurdo.
4.
Meader.
4.
Noon.
4.
Lawaz.
4.
Oliver.
4.
Ryder.
4.
Rigby.
4.
Charles Roy.
4.
Max Royden.
4.
Sampson.
4.
Sawyer. Councillor Sawyer, please.
So that was me 4. Sorry, I got a poor connection.
Thank you. Councillor Solomon.
4.
Sultan. 4. Towler.
4.
Valentine.
4.
Van.
4.
Madam Speaker.
4.
Weir.
4.
Wheeler. 4. Wootton.
He's having trouble getting in. I think I've just had a note that he wants to vote 4, but he's having trouble connecting again. So 4 for Councillor Wootton.
Thank you. And Councillor Zamir.
4.
Thank you. That is carried unanimous, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to confirm that the motion is carried. So that concludes agenda item 13, and we'll now move to agenda item 15, as there's no business to conduct in relation to item 14. So agenda item 15 is a report of the Chair of the Pension Fund Committee. So I now invite Councillor McMurdo as Chair of the Pension Fund Committee to give a presentation on the Pension Fund. Councillor McMurdo. Oh, here it comes.
Thank you, Speaker. Just before I begin on the presentation, I would just draw to your attention to page 2 of the report at brackets E, environmental implications. There are no environmental implications arising directly from this report. I like that statement because that is true in respect of the report. In fact, the very serious part of what I'm about to present tonight, amongst many, but is none least the responsible investment aspect, which has got a very, very strong element of environmental issues. But I just thought I'd flag that up because it has been a discussion point. Okay, so that's what I'm about to present on. Next slide, please. So just at a very high level, with 180 employers in the pension fund in Bedfordshire, the 3 unitary authorities, by far the largest employers, and then going through the various different sectors within our Bedfordshire area, and a number of different types of employers. I just stopped for a moment on academies. That has, and I have reported this in the past, has been where the increase of employers has grown over the last many years. Next slide, please. This one amazes me. Not the fact that we have so many members, but over 73,000 members. This is a heat map of where they all are. So some very fortunate people now retiring on a local government pension scheme pension, and they're scattered all around the country. But please do note down the bottom we have a further 30 that are elsewhere in our world globe. So, you know, it's a truly Bedfordshire pension funds are truly national spread in terms of where we are paying pensions and obviously collecting from, that being active, 24,000 active. Next slide, please. So what we're highlighting here is in fact the 2019 valuation. This is a triannual valuation. So we are looking back to 31st March 2019, following the 2016 valuation. Now this is, and I do emphasise, this is only at that moment in time, and things do fluctuate. Market positions are going up and down on a daily basis, in actual fact. But if I just draw to your attention, amongst the many measures and key performance indicator is that bottom line within the table. So back in 2016, we had a 71% funding level, and then in March 2019, 80%. And that basically means that we were better covered in terms of our asset cover against the liabilities. I don't pretend for 1 minute that that's a fantastic position to be in. I'm not going to take too much time to explain why we are there and how we're going to get out of that, because I believe that I'm between the end of this meeting and your nightcap, whether it be a brandy or indeed a Horlicks. So the background, the economic uncertainty and looking ahead is listed there, that there is a lot of uncertainties, and you will no doubt read regularly in the press some of the dynamics that we face as an investment institution. So very difficult circumstances that we're facing going forward. Next slide, please. So the admin performance is a very key measure, because this is actually interfacing with the underlying members, which I referred to earlier, in excess of 70,000 members. And so we need to be communicating with them effectively. And what you're seeing there is the amount of interactions that we have with members per year. So within as a fund administrator within Bedford Borough Council, the Bedfordshire Pension Fund, the pensions administration team, very, very busy with a relatively small team, actually dealing with about 30,000 activities. And that is proving to be very difficult, because a lot of it is and remains still paper-based, and that's something that we will look to move away from. And so I don't want to go through the table, but it gives you a highlight as to what we're doing in terms of achievement to the target days of completing the various activities. And I will say, by comparison to other funds, we do score high in our administration performance. Next slide, please. One of the tasks that the local government pension scheme has faced in the last decade and continues to face, as can be seen with some of the issues here in front of us, is around regulatory changes. It just seems a constant treadmill, and we move from one week to the next, and I'm probably exaggerating, but it often feels like that we get another consultation coming out from the department within government and or other institutes. But there is a lot going on. Don't intend going through them, because it takes a long time, but very happy to take questions. But the main point is that there's increasing governance around the pension scheme, and also a lot of regulatory changes, and that is some of them that are listed there. Next slide, please. So I'm highlighting here the most recent measure in terms of the fund, the investments in the assets under management. We're now sitting at a figure of £2.7 billion at 31st December. And what we try and articulate here is how that money is invested across various instruments and asset classes, as it's better referred to in the left-hand column. And then we have the allocation range in the right-hand column, which gives us some scope to operate within these areas. So I just go down 4 or 5 lines. You see infrastructure, and we've got an allocation range there of 0 to 15%, and we have a target there of 5% of the total asset under management, that total value, and aiming for a target allocation of about 10%. Next slide, please. What we're showing here is very evident. It's a bar graph just across the last 10 years, going back across 10 years, and how the fund performs against the benchmark. And you can see that it has been a challenge through periods, but overall we're making progress. And the asset allocation, I might just say, is a very, very important part of what one does in terms of getting performance and understanding those asset classes as to what sort of risk that you want to put on the table and to get the return. And obviously the fee, the cost of investing is increasingly more important. And I was on a call this morning where the manager I hadn't met for 3 years. I was on a call, might I say, with other colleagues. The committee was on a call, and they recalled me always saying net of fees, and that is important. But that graph shows you the performance in recent years. Next, please. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Councillor McMurdo, I think Rebecca may be having a problem with connection at her end. I'll bring up the presentation for you as well.
Okay, thank you. I shall have to check that we're not invested in Cisco, and if we are, I shall be having words with them.
Sorry, Councillor McMurdo, it's not letting me bring it up while it's still on the screen, so we'll try and sort it.
Well,
can you talk us through the Councillor McMurdo, please?
What I will do is get my own slides up, if you bear with me, Speaker.
Oh, it's okay. It's moved. It looks like it's moved on.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I am coming to the end, you'll be pleased to know. So just touch base, you'll remember the pooling agenda. So we went with Barbados Coast Pension Partnership. There are now, go back, there are now 11 pension funds in that pool. Can you go back one slide, please? 11 funds in the pension. Okay, I'm going to, I think I'll go to my own slide, Speaker, if I may, just to finish off. So there are 11 funds in the pension partnership. Their asset under managements collectively with £49.2 billion of assets, so a very, very significant pension investor and institutional investor, and 77 staff and located in Leeds. And then just to talk about the investments that we have as a fund in that pension partnership, we're 7% in global equities, 1% in infrastructure and 0.1% in private credit. We are still a small part of our assets into the partnership, but we are looking to move more over time, non-lease multi-asset credit and indeed property. And I won't be able to talk too well to these. Oh, I think you've got the slides back up. Can you move down one slide, please? No, okay, I was going to talk about responsible investment in the next two slides, This is key.
I think it's come back.
Okay, I'm not seeing it this end. So I don't need the slides to talk about the next two slides. In investing, particularly within the LGPS, we're absolutely determined to make our investments in such a way that it's responsibly invest. And we lead in Bedfordshire, and I am a chair of the Local Authority Pension Fund Forum. And we take a very serious part and seat at the table of many companies to discuss of the failings and weaknesses within a company's oversight, governance and independence in terms of the main board, etc. So it's something that Bedfordshire is got some strength in the local government pension scheme. Okay, I'm going to now close, and I'm reading from my slides here. I would just like to acknowledge and thank all the efforts of the employers and what they go to maintain the very important data updates. It's absolutely paramount. Bad data, you get bad outcomes. So thank you to all the employers, and that includes Bedford Borough Council. I'd like to thank our consultants and independent advisor for their support. And my sincere thanks go to all my colleagues in the Pension Committee. And in particular, I'd like to thank Councillors Gamble, Nawaz and Sawyer for their ongoing support. Thank you very much. Recognise the work that the local pension board does, and thank you to them. And I do want to thank the fund administrator, Andy Watkins, a very familiar name to you all. Probably less familiar, but my many thanks go to the pension manager, Julie McCabe. And then I just do want to highlight in particular the administration team for the very hard work that they put in. And I have to say, in the last 12 months, these have been very challenging times. And then a very special point I'd just like to say, it's with great regret but one of our long-standing members of the committee, and indeed the employer representative for many years, but Willie White, as many of you will know of him now, Will White, and he has his resignation. He's standing down from the pension committee. So I just want to put on record our thanks to Will, who now works for Bedford Borough Council. So that's a move from where he was he's joined a decent borough council now. He's moved to Bedford. So yeah, that concludes my presentation. Sorry there was technical hiccups, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McMurdo. Is the motion seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Gamble. Are there any questions on the report? Not see any hands. Are there any comments on the report? No. Councillor McMurdo, do you have it? Oh, sorry, Councillor Bywater. Yeah, carry on.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor McMurdo. We had a presentation on pensions in the Climate Change Committee back in the autumn. It was really interesting. And I just want to sort of reiterate really how glad I am to see about the ESG and the responsible investment, and just to emphasise what I think we all know is that local councils have a huge responsibility towards the public good, and so part of that is the issue of the climate crisis and the part that investments play. I mean, Mark Carney, I think it was 2 years ago now, he was speaking about the financial sector not divesting fast enough, as well as the really serious risks of stranded assets in coal, for example. So the threat of a divestment has to be there. I know there's a lot of talk about engagement, but sometimes I think engagement, the word engagement is used too much without the threat of divestment really looming. And also, just as a comment, I'd like to remind people that the University of Bedfordshire proudly was one of the first universities in the country to divest from fossil fuels. So I hope, I know it's not a simple matter, but I hope that local pensions can similarly continue to work really hard on divesting ahead of engagement, putting that emphasis where it should be, acknowledging the climate emergency.
Thank you, Councillor Bywater. Would you like me to sum up, Councillor Walker?
No, hang on. I've got some hands up now. Councillor Foley, you had your hand up. You took it down. Did you want to comment, or has Councillor Bywater put your comment?
Councillor Bywater said very much what I was going to say, and very well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Meader.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. Nothing specific to the report, but I'd just like to thank Dougie and say well done to Dougie to reporting on a pensions update at 20 to 9 at night. Not the easiest thing to do during the working day hours. So thanks, Dougie. That's quite interesting for this time of night. Much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Meader. Yes, if you'd like to. Yeah, no, it's still an old hand. If you'd like to sum up then, Councillor McMurdo, please.
Thank you, Speaker. I have invited, and I repeat my invitation to any councillor to come and talk to myself and indeed any of the committee. But I just want to make one thing absolutely well understood, that there will be no divestment over engagement. There will be engagement over divestment. And I want that to be absolutely well understood. We have a fiduciary duty to pay pensioners when the liability falls. But to put that into context, and Councillor Bywater mentioned stranded assets. One of the biggest stranded assets that hits us in the face these days is thermal coal. And what I do in my capacity as the chairman of the Local Authority Pension Fund Forum is meet people like Tony Hayward. Now, you won't be, I won't be surprised that you don't know who Tony Hayward is, but he's the chairman of the biggest coal miner in the world, and that being Glencore. And so I have meetings to engage with these companies on behalf of LAPFF, and we talk about what they're going to do about coal. And in the case of Glencore, they've just announced that they will be out of thermal coal in a point in the future. So I don't want to go on too long because I can talk for hours on it, but it will be engagement over divestment. And I'll just leave it at that. Madam Speaker, I commend the report to you. I move the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor McMurdo. So as this report is for receipt only, I'll assume that we're all in favour unless you indicate otherwise by either raising your hand or stating your name. I can't see anybody doing that, so the motion is carried. So that concludes agenda item 15, and we move on to agenda item 18 as there's no business relating to items 16 or 17. Agenda item 18 is the calendar of meetings for the municipal year of 2021-22. Can I move from the chair that the calendar of meetings for that year be approved?
Seconded.
Thank you very much, Councillor McHugh. Are there any questions? Councillor Meader, your hand is still raised. Is that an old hand?
Sorry, Madam Speaker, old hand again, coming down.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Any comments? No. The motion is before the council. A poll has been set up to enable you to vote either for or against the motion or to abstain, and you have 1 minute to cast your vote. Have we got the poll? I can't see a poll.
Madam Speaker, the poll is up.
Oh,
and there's just a few more people to vote.
I can't see the poll this time.
I have 36 members voted in favour.
Okay, with that then the motion is carried. Thank you. So that concludes agenda item 18, and there being no other items of council business, I declare this meeting closed. And thank you all for your patience. hasn't it? With
Well done, Madam Speaker.